A former Navy SEAL who had spent nearly 10 years as a canine handler now helped rescue dogs find new homes at a small animal shelter in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Daniel Hayes believed he could understand almost any dog within minutes of watching it. That's why, when an elderly couple returned 2 7-week-old German Shepherd puppies after only 7 days, he could hardly believe it. Maybe the puppies were never the problem. Maybe everyone had been loving them the wrong way from the very beginning. What Daniel discovered next changed not only the puppies' lives, but also the hearts of the people who had tried to love them. Before we begin, let us know what city you're watching from, and if you believe animals can teach us how to love with more patience, please subscribe to the channel. Cold rain drifted over the Blue Ridge foothills, turning the morning outside Asheville soft, gray, and quiet, as if the whole town had lowered its voice for something fragile. Blue Ridge Haven Animal Shelter sat at the edge of a narrow country road between a closed feed store and a line of wet maple trees. Inside, the building was never truly silent. Dogs barked from the kennel wing, metal bowls clicked against concrete floors, and somewhere near the laundry room, an old dryer groaned like it had been complaining since the Reagan administration and had no plans to stop. Daniel Hayes knew every sound. At 42, Daniel was a tall, broad-shouldered man with light skin, short dark brown hair, a square jaw roughened by a close salt-and-pepper beard, and gray-blue eyes that seemed calm even when his mind was working hard. He had once been a Navy SEAL canine handler, a man trained to read danger in half a second and trust a dog's body language before he trusted most human sentences. Since leaving the Navy, he had carried his discipline quietly, not as pride, but as a kind of armor. He spoke gently to the dogs, politely to people, and almost never about the parts of his life that still visited him in dreams. That morning, 2 German Shepherd puppies arrived in a plastic carrier lined with a thin blue towel. They were about 7 weeks old, sisters from the same litter, but anyone watching closely could see they carried the world in different ways. Hazel was the larger one, a black and tan female with soft triangular ears still deciding whether to stand or flop, dark brown eyes too serious for a puppy, and a narrow blaze of tan above each brow that gave her the look of a tiny old soul trapped in a fur coat. Maisie was smaller, sable gray-brown, lighter on her chest with a delicate muzzle, rounder eyes, and a habit of pressing herself against Hazel as if her sister were a wall built against thunder. Most puppies entered the shelter by protesting loudly, chewing towels, or treating fear as an invitation to bark at the universe. Hazel did none of that. She sat in the back corner of the enclosure, watching the room. Maisie tucked herself against Hazel's side and watched Hazel. Daniel did not reach for them. He had learned long ago that trust, like an old gate, rarely opened faster because someone pulled harder. He placed fresh water inside the kennel, slid a small bowl of softened food near the towel, and stepped back. Hazel's eyes followed his hand, then his boots, then the movement of a volunteer passing behind him. Maisie looked at Hazel first, then at Daniel, as if asking permission from the only creature she trusted. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest, not pity exactly, but recognition. Some beings survived by running toward the world. Others survived by studying it from the shadows until they found one safe step. Over the next few days, families came and went. A young father with a baseball cap laughed as a yellow lab puppy climbed into his lap. 2 little girls in pink raincoats squealed over a beagle that rolled onto its back for belly rubs. An older woman with pearl earrings said Hazel and Maisie were beautiful, then chose a puppy who ran straight to the gate with his tail wagging like a flag. No one was cruel. They simply loved the dogs who knew how to ask for love loudly. Hazel and Maisie remained in their corner beneath the thin shelter blanket, 2 small bodies pressed together, 2 pairs of eyes measuring the world inch by inch. Daniel began taking his lunch beside their enclosure. He did not call their names. He did not rattle toys. He sat in a metal chair, drank coffee from a dented travel mug, and pretended to read intake forms while actually watching every small change. Hazel always checked a new sound first. If a door slammed, her head lifted. If a leash dropped, Her ears twitched. If nothing dangerous followed, she relaxed. Maisie waited for Hazel's answer before deciding what to feel. Daniel wrote a few notes in the margin of their file. Cautious, bonded, observant, not shut down. He paused before the last phrase, then underlined it. They were not broken. They were simply moving at the speed of trust. 4 days after the puppies arrived, William and Carol Thompson walked into the shelter just after noon, bringing with them the scent of rain, wool coats, and a grief so quiet it did not need announcing. William was 74, a lean man with stooped shoulders, thinning white hair, weathered fair skin, and kind brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He moved carefully, not because he was weak, but because age had taught him that rushing rarely improved anything. Carol was 72, small and soft-faced, with short silver hair, pale blue eyes, and hands that worried the strap of her purse whenever her heart moved faster than her words. She had the tender, watchful nature of a woman who had spent a lifetime remembering everyone's medicine, birthdays, and favorite pie, and had recently discovered that care had nowhere familiar to go. Their golden retriever, Murphy, had died 4 months earlier after 14 years in their home. Daniel saw it in the way they paused before each kennel, smiling politely, but never quite fully. When Carol reached Hazel and Maisie's enclosure, she stopped. Hazel lifted her head. Maisie pressed closer. No one moved for several seconds. Then Carol crouched slowly, keeping her hands folded in her lap, and whispered to William that maybe those 2 little girls knew what it felt like to lose a home. William did not answer at once. He only looked at the puppies, then at his wife, and nodded with the weary gentleness of a man who had loved one dog all the way to the end. Daniel watched them ask careful questions. They did not demand affection. They did not complain that the puppies were shy. Carol asked what made them feel safe. William asked whether they should stay together. By the time the adoption papers were placed on the desk, Daniel felt a quiet certainty settle over him. 2 lonely people, 2 frightened puppies, and 1 small chance at beginning again. Outside, rain silvered the parking lot as William and Carol carried Hazel and Maisie to their car. Daniel stood beneath the shelter awning, hands in his jacket pockets, watching the taillights disappear into the mist, believing with all the confidence of a man who had read dogs for years that the 2 little German shepherds had finally found the right home. The rain followed William and Carol Thompson all the way home, softening the road ahead of them until the Blue Ridge Hills looked like faded watercolor behind the windshield. Hazel and Maisie rode in a padded crate on the back seat, pressed close together beneath the thin shelter blanket Daniel had sent with them. William drove slowly, both hands on the wheel, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the gray light each time they passed beneath the bare branches along the roadside. Beside him, Carol turned around so often to check on the puppies that William finally gave a small, tired smile and said, "They're still there, honey." Carol smiled back, but it trembled before it settled. At 72, she had the kind of face that looked made for kindness, soft at the cheeks, pale around the eyes, framed by short silver hair that curled slightly in damp weather. Since Murphy died, her hands had never quite learned what to do with themselves. They folded napkins, wiped clean counters that were already clean, straightened pillows no one had moved. Now they worried the sleeve of her coat as she watched the crate, whispering little promises the puppies did not yet understand. Their house sat at the end of a quiet street outside Asheville, a white 1-story home with green shutters, a narrow porch, and a backyard that sloped toward a line of winter-bare trees. It was not a lonely house by design. There were flower beds Carol had tended for 30 years, a bird feeder William refilled every morning, and a porch swing that complained loudly enough to count as a third person in conversation. But after Murphy was gone, the rooms had grown too large. Murphy had been a golden retriever with a sugar-white muzzle, patient brown eyes, and a tail that thumped against walls like a friendly drum. For 14 years, he had slept by the fireplace, followed Carol from room to room, and leaned his old body against William's leg every evening as if reminding him the world had not entirely come apart. When his bed became empty, the silence did not simply enter the house. It moved in, unpacked, and sat at the table with them. Carol had prepared everything before they left for the shelter that morning, though she had pretended not to hope too much. 2 small dog beds waited near the fireplace, one blue and one cream. 2 ceramic bowls sat in the kitchen, each with a tiny paw print painted on the side. A basket of toys rested beside the couch. Rope shoes, soft balls, a squeaky duck so ridiculous-looking that William had laughed in the store for the first time in weeks. On the armchair lay Murphy's old blanket, washed but still faintly carrying the memory of him, the corners worn thin from years of paws and naps. Carol had hesitated over that blanket. Part of her feared it was unfair, as if she were asking 2 new lives to step into an old dog's shadow. Another part of her believed love might leave a warmth behind, like sunlight on a floor after the window had gone dark. When William carried the crate inside and opened the door, Hazel did not come out at once. She sat in the back, black and tan fur slightly rumpled from the ride, dark eyes moving from the fireplace to the couch to Carol's hands. Maisie stayed behind her, smaller and sable gray, her little chin nearly resting on Hazel's shoulder. William lowered himself carefully onto one knee, his joints giving a small protest. "No hurry," he said, and meant it. But meaning a thing and living it are often 2 different trials. 5 minutes passed. 10. Carol sat on the floor a few feet away, her blue eyes bright with tenderness and worry. At last, Hazel stepped out, not toward them, but toward the dining table. Maisie followed so closely that her nose brushed Hazel's back leg. The 2 puppies slipped beneath a chair and settled against the wall, still as tucked-away secrets. Carol tried to keep her voice light. "Well, that's all right. New places are scary." She placed the blue bed closer to the table. William moved the water bowl nearby. Carol set Murphy's blanket within reach, then wondered if that was too much, then decided moving it away would also be too much. The house, which had waited so hungrily for life, seemed to lean toward the puppies with every lamp, every cushion, every old photograph on the wall. Hazel sniffed the blanket once, then turned her head. Maisie did not move. Carol felt a tiny sting of rejection and immediately scolded herself for it. They were babies, frightened babies. Of course, they needed time. Still, her heart had imagined a different homecoming. Paws on the floor, perhaps a hesitant lick, perhaps one small sign that the love she had stored up for months had found somewhere to go. That first evening, William and Carol ate supper at the kitchen table while Hazel and Maisie stayed beneath it. William slipped a bit of plain chicken onto a saucer and placed it near the puppies. Hazel waited until his hand was gone before sniffing it. Maisie watched Hazel, then nibbled after Hazel did. "See?" Carol whispered, as if speaking too loudly might break the moment. "They're eating." William nodded, but his eyes carried that hopeful caution old grief teaches people. He had lost Murphy slowly, one gray morning at a time, through stiff joints, missed meals, and the terrible mercy of a final appointment. He told himself he would not compare. Yet, when Hazel did not rest her head on his shoe the way Murphy once had, he felt the absence twice. Once for the dog who was gone, and once for the puppies who were here but unreachable. By the second day, Carol began following them gently whenever they moved. If Hazel left the dining room for the hallway, Carol appeared a few minutes later with a toy. If Maisie tucked herself behind the armchair, William sat nearby with his newspaper, pretending not to watch. They never grabbed. They never shouted. They never did anything a careless person would do. That was the quiet tragedy of it. Their kindness was real. Their patience was sincere. But each time Hazel tried to create a little distance, love came softly after her, wearing slippers and carrying treats. Each time Maisie looked to Hazel for safety, she saw human faces bending closer, human voices floating down, human hands placing comfort where the puppies had not asked for it yet. On the 3rd night, rain tapped the windows again, and Carol sat on the living room rug with the squeaky duck in her lap. "Maybe they don't know how to play," she said. William, sitting in his old recliner, lowered the newspaper he had not been reading. His face, lined deeply around the mouth and eyes, held the worn dignity of a man trying to be hopeful for his wife's sake. "Maybe tomorrow," he said. Carol nodded. Tomorrow became a small altar in that house. Tomorrow they might wag their tails. Tomorrow Hazel might come when called. Tomorrow Maisie might climb into Carol's lap. Tomorrow the beds by the fireplace might finally look less like props arranged for a play no one had agreed to perform. But Hazel chose the space beneath the table again, then the narrow place beside the bookshelf, then the corner behind the armchair. Maisie remained her shadow. Carol began reading aloud in the afternoons, thinking the sound of her voice might soothe them. William carried treats in his shirt pocket and offered one whenever he passed. When Hazel turned away, he told himself not to mind. When Maisie trembled after he sat too close, he felt something inside him shrink. Neither of them said the fear out loud at first. It would have sounded foolish, almost childish, to two people who had raised children, buried parents, paid bills, endured surgeries, and watched a beloved dog grow old. But the fear was there. What if even these two small creatures could feel the hollowness in the house and wanted no part of it? By the 7th evening, the cream-colored bed still sat untouched. The blue bed held only the squeaky duck, which had fallen sideways with a stupid, cheerful grin. Carol stood at the kitchen sink, looking through the dark window at her own reflection. She saw a woman with tired eyes, silver hair, and too much love gathered in her chest with nowhere safe to pour it. Iad. Behind her, under the dining chair, Hazel lay with her head lifted. Maisie was curled against her side, one tiny paw over Hazel's front leg. They looked peaceful together, but not at home. That difference broke Carol more than any barking or misbehavior could have. William came to stand beside her. For a long moment, neither spoke. The refrigerator hummed. Rain whispered against the glass. From beneath the table came the faint sound of Maisie shifting closer to Hazel. Carol wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. "We're scaring them, aren't we?" she whispered. William looked at the puppies, then at the two little beds by the fireplace, then at Murphy's folded blanket. His throat moved before the words came. "Maybe they just don't like us." It was not accusation. It was not anger. It was the sound of an old man finding a new crack in a heart already patched too many times. Carol turned toward him, and for a moment they stood together in the too-warm kitchen, surrounded by bowls, toys, blankets, and the terrible evidence of good intentions. They had filled the house with love, but somehow the love had become too large for two frightened puppies to breathe inside. Morning rain came down in a fine gray mist, soft enough to seem harmless, steady enough to make every window in Asheville look as if it were quietly crying. William Thompson drove slower than usual, though there was no traffic on the road leading back to Blue Ridge Haven Animal Shelter. His hands rested at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, knuckles pale beneath weathered skin, his wire-rimmed glasses slipping low on his nose every few minutes. Beside him, Carol sat with Hazel and Maisie's adoption folder pressed against her lap like a document from a trial she had already lost. She had dressed carefully that morning, in a dark blue wool coat and a cream scarf Murphy used to tug at when he was younger, but grief made even neat clothes look fragile. In the back seat, Hazel and Maisie lay together inside the crate, not crying, not scratching, not doing anything a person could point to and call wrong. Hazel's black and tan head rested upright, her dark eyes following the passing trees through the fogged glass. Maisie, smaller and sable-gray, curled so tightly against her sister that she seemed less like a puppy than a shadow trying not to be separated from its source. Carol had nearly changed her mind 3 times before they left the house. Once when Maisie licked a crumb from the kitchen floor. Once when Hazel looked toward William's voice. Once when Carol saw the 2 untouched beds by the fireplace and thought that perhaps one more day might fix everything. But love, when it is frightened, sometimes grows desperate enough to make the hardest choice and call it mercy. "We're doing the right thing," William said, though his voice sounded as if he were asking permission from the rain. Carol nodded, but a tear escaped before she could stop it. "I don't know what the right thing is anymore," she whispered. Daniel Hayes was behind the adoption counter when the bell above the shelter door rang. The sound was bright and ordinary, too cheerful for the morning. He looked up from a stack of intake forms, expecting a volunteer, a delivery driver, maybe a family coming early to meet the hound mix in Kennel 6. Instead, William stepped inside first, shoulders hunched under his brown raincoat, followed by Carol, who carried the canvas bag Daniel recognized at once. The folder was inside it. The veterinary records, the adoption papers, the little packet every new family took home with hope tucked between the pages. Daniel felt something in his chest go still before his face changed. He had seen returns before. Some came with irritation, some with excuses, some with a casual shrug that made him want to walk out into the parking lot and argue with the clouds. This did not look like any of those. William's face was drawn and gray, his mouth set in a line too tired to be anger. Carol's eyes were swollen from a night of not sleeping. Behind them, Hazel and Maisie stood close together on a double leash, rain beating along their soft puppy coats. Hazel looked around the shelter with alert stillness, as if cataloging every smell and sound. Maisie tucked her body against Hazel's shoulder. Daniel came around the counter slowly. "William? Carol?" He tried to keep his voice steady. "Everything all right?" Carol attempted a smile, but it vanished before it became real. William looked down at the two puppies, then back at Daniel. "We need to talk." The small room behind the adoption desk had beige walls, a metal filing cabinet, 2 chairs, and a window that faced the side yard where rain made dark dots on the concrete walkway. Daniel had used that room for happy meetings, difficult explanations, and once for a Labrador who had stolen half a turkey sandwich from a volunteer's lunch bag and seemed deeply proud of it. That memory almost surfaced, a small, absurd spark, but it died when Carol sat down and placed the canvas bag on her knees with both hands. Hazel and Maisie slipped beneath her chair almost immediately. Not wildly, not in panic, simply choosing the lowest, quietest place in the room. Daniel noticed it and hated that he noticed it like evidence. William remained standing for a moment before lowering himself into the second chair. His knees cracked softly. He folded his hands and stared at them as if the right words might be written across his fingers. "We don't think this is working," he said at last. The sentence was not loud, but it landed heavily. Daniel looked at the puppies, then at the older couple. "What happened?" Carol drew a breath that shook halfway in. "Nothing terrible," she said quickly, as if she needed to defend them from an accusation no one had made. "They didn't chew furniture, they didn't bite, they didn't bark all night. They're good little girls." Her voice broke on the word good. William closed his eyes for a second. "That's what makes it worse." Piece by piece they told him about the week. The beds by the fireplace, the bowls with painted paw prints, Murphy's old blanket, Carol reading aloud in the afternoons, hoping the sound of her voice would become familiar, William carrying treats in his pocket, saving bits of plain chicken, sitting nearby with the newspaper because he thought silence might help. They told him how Hazel chose corners and spaces beneath furniture, how Maisie followed her everywhere, how the two puppies seemed calmer together but farther away whenever William or Carol tried to comfort them. "We thought if we stayed close," Carol said, twisting the edge of her scarf, "they would know we wanted them. We thought they would feel safe." Daniel listened without interrupting, but inside him something was beginning to turn against itself. He had matched them. He had watched William and Carol speak softly at the kennel. He had admired their patience. He had told himself 2 quiet puppies and 2 gentle older people might heal one another by proximity, as if loneliness could simply be seated beside loneliness and become companionship. Now he wondered if he had mistaken quiet for compatibility. William rubbed one thumb over his wedding ring, the motion slow and unconscious. "Every time they moved away, we followed. Not right away, not harshly, but we followed." He swallowed. "I think maybe we crowded them." Carol looked down at Hazel beneath the chair. "Or maybe they just don't like us." Daniel had expected some practical problem: house training, noise, energy, fear of stairs, trouble eating. He had not expected two good people to sit before him and offer their own heartbreak as the reason. That made the room feel smaller. He crouched carefully, keeping his body angled away, and looked beneath the chair. Hazel met his gaze for 1 second, then looked past him toward the door. Maisie pressed her chin against Hazel's shoulder. They were not shut down. They were not aggressive. Their little bodies were healthy, their eyes clear, their fear quiet but organized. Daniel knew those signs. He had seen dogs who feared hands, dogs who feared men, dogs who feared thunder, dogs who feared hunger returning. This was different. Hazel was not begging the world to leave her forever. She was asking it to stop reaching so fast. Maisie was not refusing love. She was borrowing courage from the only creature who had not confused her. Daniel stood again, but the realization was not yet whole enough to speak. It moved around inside him like a shape behind fog. The return paperwork lay on the desk between them. Daniel hated how simple it looked. Name of adopter, date, reason for return, a few blank lines pretending grief could fit inside them. William took the pen first. His hand paused before touching the paper. "I'm sorry," he said. Daniel shook his head. "You don't have to apologize." "Yes," William said quietly. "I think we do." He signed his name with careful, uneven strokes. Carol signed after him, wiping her cheek with the 2 fingers before she handed the pen back. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Rain tapped against the window. Somewhere down the hall, a terrier barked twice and then fell silent. Hazel and Maisie remained under the chair, tucked together like a secret the adults had failed to understand. When it was time to leave, William stood slowly. He looked older than he had a week ago. Not 7 days older, but years. Carol bent as if she wanted to touch the puppies one last time, then stopped herself halfway, folding her hand back against her chest. The restraint cost her. Daniel could see it in the tremble of her mouth. William crouched instead, not close enough to crowd them, just low enough for his voice to reach. "Be good girls," he said. Maisie hid her nose behind Hazel's shoulder. Hazel looked at him, still and unreadable, her small, serious face holding more silence than any puppy should have to carry. William's eyes filled, but he did not reach out. Perhaps that was the first thing he had done exactly right, and the mercy of it arrived too late to save him from the pain. Carol turned toward the door. Daniel looked away, giving them the dignity of not being watched while their hearts broke in public. After the shelter door closed behind them, Daniel remained in the room with the 2 puppies and the unsigned feeling that something important had been missed. A young shelter employee named Megan Price appeared at the doorway a minute later. Megan was 24, short and sturdy, with warm brown skin, dark curls pinned messily above her neck, and the brisk kindness of someone who could clean kennels, answer phones, and comfort a crying child all before lunch. She glanced at Hazel and Maisie, then at the papers on the desk. "Should I put them back in the puppy room?" she asked. From down the hall came the wild chorus of young dogs tumbling over one another, barking for toys, food, attention, life. Hazel lifted her head toward the sound. Maisie tucked closer. Daniel pictured them back beneath the bright lights, passed over again by families who wanted joy to run at them with its tail wagging. He thought of William's face, Carol's folded hand, Murphy's blanket, and his own certainty leaving him like air from a punctured tire. "No," he said. Megan waited. Daniel clipped the leash gently to Hazel's collar, then to Maisie's. "I'll take them home for a while." The words surprised him with their weight. As he led the puppies toward the side exit, Hazel walked first, Maisie close enough to brush her flank. Daniel paused beneath the awning and looked out at the rain. For the first time in many years, the former Navy SEAL who had trusted his ability to read dogs felt the old armor crack. Maybe he had not been wrong about the puppies. Maybe he had been wrong about what love was supposed to look like. By the time Daniel reached his house, the rain had thinned into silver mist, and the evening lay over the outskirts of Asheville like a tired hand on a sleeping town. Daniel Hayes lived in a small one-story house at the end of a gravel lane, where the road bent toward a stand of pines and the Blue Ridge foothills rose dark beyond the trees. The place was plain, almost stubbornly so. White siding weathered by rain, a narrow front porch, 2 wooden chairs, a kitchen window that looked out over a yard full of wet leaves. There were no family photographs on the mantel, no bright decorations, no clutter except for books, dog training manuals, and an old Navy Challenge coin resting beside a lamp. The house suited him because it asked very little. After years of commands, alarms, and decisions that could break a life in half, Daniel had come to value rooms that did not demand explanations. He carried Hazel and Maisie's crate inside, set it near the dining table, and opened the door without ceremony. "All right," he said softly, "your move." Then he stepped away. Hazel did not come out immediately. She sat at the back of the crate, black and tan ears tilted forward, dark eyes measuring the new world. The scuffed floorboards, the hallway, the kitchen doorway, Daniel's boots. Maisie, smaller and sable gray, remained pressed behind her, one tiny paw resting against Hazel's side. Daniel did not reach in. He did not click his tongue, did not offer a treat from his hand, did not bend over them with the heavy kindness people often mistook for gentleness. Instead, he filled 2 bowls with water, placed softened food near the crate, spread 2 old fleece blankets beneath the dining chairs, and walked into the living room with a book he did not truly intend to read. For nearly 20 minutes, nothing happened. The clock above the kitchen sink ticked with the solemn importance of a preacher counting sins. Outside, rainwater dripped from the gutters. Daniel turned a page every so often, though his eyes barely touched the words. He had spent enough of his life waiting on dogs to know that waiting was not emptiness. Waiting was work. It was restraint, dressed up as stillness. At last, Hazel stepped out of the crate. Her paws made no sound on the floor. She sniffed the edge of the nearest blanket, then chose the shadow beneath a dining chair instead. Maisie followed quickly, so close that she nearly bumped Hazel's hind leg. The 2 puppies curled together under the chair, not hidden completely, but not available either. Daniel looked once, then looked away. That was the first promise he made them. He would see without taking. The first night passed with the quiet tension of a candle held against the wind. Daniel ate dinner at the kitchen counter, washed his plate, and moved through the house with deliberate softness. He did not tiptoe. Fear could smell pretending. He simply made his movements predictable. When he crossed the room, he did it slowly. When he set down a mug, he avoided sudden clatter. Hazel watched every motion. Maisie watched Hazel. Later, Daniel opened a small black notebook from the drawer beside his chair. It was the kind he used years ago for canine training observations, search patterns, scent work, and behavior notes. He had not written in it for months. On the first page he wrote, Day 1. Hazel. Alert, controlled, no panic. Maisie. Dependent on Hazel, startles through her. Both need space. Do not pursue. He stared at the last 3 words longer than expected. Do not pursue. It sounded simple, almost laughably simple, and yet William and Carol's wounded faces rose in his mind like ghosts standing in a doorway. On the second morning, Daniel found the food bowls empty. Hazel and Maisie were still beneath the dining chair, tucked into their small fortress of legs and shadows. He made coffee, the same bitter, dark coffee he had relied on through worse mornings than this, and stood by the sink while pale light seeped across the yard. Maisie lifted her head when the kettle hissed, then lowered it only after Hazel remained calm. Daniel noticed the sequence. Sound, Hazel assesses, Maisie follows. He wrote it down before leaving for the shelter. When he returned that afternoon, nothing dramatic greeted him. No wagging tails, no joyful yelps, no miracle made for a movie. Hazel had moved 3 feet. She now lay near the kitchen doorway, where she could see the living room, the hall, and the back door. Maisie still stayed under the dining chair, but her nose pointed toward Hazel instead of the wall. Daniel smiled before he could stop himself. Not bad, he murmured, not to them exactly, but to the tiny brave machinery of trust beginning to turn. By the third day, the house had started to change around them, not in appearance, but in rhythm. Daniel found himself aware of where he placed his feet, how loudly he closed cabinets, how long he held eye contact. His old SEAL training had taught him to enter rooms and read exits, threats, angles, blind spots. Hazel taught him to read gentler things, where safety widened, where pressure tightened, where a creature's courage ended for the day. He began leaving doors open so the puppies could choose pathways. He placed water in the kitchen but food near the dining room, then later shifted it an inch farther out, not as a trick, but as an invitation too small to insult their fear. Hazel accepted some invitations. Maisie accepted fewer. That was all right. Daniel had known men who needed years to speak of what had happened to them. He would not ask a 7-week-old puppy to heel on command. On the 5th evening, while a football game murmured on the television, Daniel noticed Hazel lying on the rug near the sofa. Not under the table, not behind the chair. On the rug, in the same room as him. Her head rested on her paws, but her eyes remained open. Maisie stood halfway between the dining table and the rug, trembling with the terrible decision of whether to follow. Daniel kept his gaze on the book in his lap, though his heart had become strangely attentive. After a minute, Maisie took 2 steps, stopped, then turned back to the table. Hazel did not move. 10 minutes later, Maisie tried again. This time she reached the edge of the rug and folded herself behind Hazel, using her sister's body as a shield against the enormous danger of a quiet living room. Daniel did not praise them. Praise would have filled the room too fast. He only breathed slowly and let the moment keep its own shape. That night, Daniel reached for a spoon while making tea and knocked it from the counter. It struck the floor with a sharp metallic clatter. Maisie sprang up so quickly her paws slid on the wood. Hazel lifted her head, ears forward, body tight but not fleeing. Daniel froze, not in guilt, but discipline. He did not apologize in a rush, did not bend down, did not flood the room with words. Hazel stared at the spoon, then at Daniel, then at the hallway. A few seconds passed. Nothing followed the sound. No shouting, no hands, no chase. Hazel lowered her head again. Maisie remained standing, breathing fast, until she saw Hazel settle. Then, slowly, she sank back down beside her. Daniel felt the lesson land with a force that embarrassed him. Hazel was not merely learning trust for herself. She was translating the world for Maisie. If Hazel said the thunder was only a spoon, then Maisie could believe it too. He wrote late into the night. Not training goals, not corrections. Observations. Hazel recovers after sudden noise. Maisie regulates through Hazel. Direct attention increases distance. Neutral presence reduces retreat. The phrases looked clinical on paper, but beneath them Daniel felt something human and sore beginning to move. He thought of Carol placing Murphy's blanket near the puppies with trembling hope. He thought of William kneeling on old knees, offering treats like small prayers. They had not been careless. Their mistake had worn the face of devotion. They had tried to pour warmth into 2 frightened lives, but they had poured too quickly, and the little creatures had stepped back from the flood. By the 7th morning in Daniel's house, the rain had stopped. Sunlight slipped through the kitchen window and spread across the floor in a pale gold square. Hazel walked into it first, sniffed once, and sat. Maisie hovered at the edge, then eased forward until one front paw touched the light. Daniel stood at the counter, coffee cooling in his hand, and felt the old certainty he had carried for years loosen inside him. He had thought understanding meant knowing what a dog needed and giving it. Now he wondered if understanding sometimes meant making room for the dog to tell you. Hazel glanced toward him, then away. Maisie leaned into her sister. Neither came to him, not yet. But they had come closer to the room, closer to the morning, closer to the life around them. Daniel did not call them. He did not move. He simply let the sunlight hold them. The 2 puppies had not rejected love. They had only been waiting for love to stop chasing them long enough to become safe. And when no one pursued, they began, little by little, to step forward on their own. The next morning opened with a hard frost on Daniel's porch rails, thin and white as powdered glass, while the hills beyond Asheville stood quiet beneath a pale November sky. Daniel woke before sunrise, not because an alarm called him, but because old habits still lived in his bones like soldiers who had never received permission to go home. In the kitchen, Hazel lay near the edge of the sunlight that had not yet fully arrived, her black and tan body curled into a careful half-moon. Maisie slept behind her, sable gray fur puffed slightly from warmth, her nose tucked against Hazel's back leg. They had chosen the kitchen doorway sometime during the night. Not the dining chair, not the narrow space beneath the table, but the doorway. Close enough to the center of the house to hear Daniel move, far enough to escape if the world suddenly became too large. Daniel noticed before he made coffee. He noticed everything now, not because he was trying to control them, but because their quiet had become a language he was only beginning to respect. At the shelter, later that morning, Daniel opened Hazel and Maisie's adoption file and stared at the first description he had helped approve. 2 gentle German Shepherd puppies, quiet temperament, good fit for a calm family home. The words looked harmless, even kind, but now they felt like a door painted on a wall. They gave the illusion of understanding without offering anyone a way through. Daniel took a pen from the chipped mug beside the computer and drew a slow line through the sentence. The sound of ink scratching paper seemed louder than it should have. He had once corrected younger handlers for making assumptions too quickly, for seeing a dog sit still and calling it obedience, for seeing a dog bark and calling it aggression. Now, here he was, guilty of a softer version of the same mistake. He had seen stillness and called it calm. He had seen quiet people and called them safe. He had placed 2 silences together and expected them to become peace. He wrote beneath the old description, Hazel builds trust slowly, observes before engaging, needs room to approach on her own. Maisie relies on Hazel for safety and emotional regulation. Both puppies require patient adopters who respect distance and do not force interaction. He paused after the last line. Do not force interaction. The phrase was simple enough for any adoption sheet, yet it carried the weight of William's bowed head and Carol's trembling hand. Daniel leaned back in his chair, the file open before him like a confession. Around him, the shelter moved through its usual morning chaos. A terrier barked at a mop. Megan laughed somewhere down the hall after dropping a stack of towels. A delivery man complained cheerfully about the cold. Life continued with the rude confidence of ordinary things, but Daniel felt as if the world had shifted half an inch and every familiar shape now asked to be seen again. For the rest of the day, he watched the shelter differently. A spaniel who always barked at visitors stopped when people turned sideways instead of facing him head-on. A nervous, mixed-breed female relaxed when a volunteer stopped saying her name every 10 seconds. A puppy, everyone called friendly, kept leaping at families until one child began to cry, not because the puppy was bad, but because nobody had taught him that excitement could become pressure. Daniel saw each small moment with an uncomfortable clarity. Love was everywhere in the shelter. It came with squeaky toys, adoption forms, soft voices, donated blankets, and children pressing hopeful faces to kennel doors. But love, he was beginning to understand, was not automatically wisdom. Sometimes it arrived carrying its own hunger. Sometimes it reached too soon because waiting felt like rejection. Sometimes it asked an animal, or a person, to become proof that the lover had not failed. When Daniel returned home, Hazel was on the rug near the sofa. Maisie was halfway beneath the coffee table, watching Hazel instead of him. He placed his keys in the bowl near the door and did not greet them directly. A month earlier, he would have considered that cold. Now it felt like respect. He warmed soup on the stove, sat at the counter, and ate slowly while the house settled into evening. The silence was different from the silence before the puppies came. Before it had been flat, orderly, almost military. Now it breathed. It had pause in it, tiny shifts of weight, the soft click of nails on wood, the occasional sigh of a puppy deciding the world had not ended after all. His phone rang just after 7. William Thompson's name appeared on the screen. Daniel let it ring once more than necessary, not because he did not want to answer, but because he understood the courage it must have taken for the old man to call. "Hello, William?" he said. There was a pause, filled with faint static and the distant sound of a television in the Thompson house. William cleared his throat. "I hope I'm not bothering you." His voice sounded thinner than it had at the shelter, as if the empty house had been sanding him down. Daniel looked toward Hazel, who had lifted her head at the sound of his voice. "You're not." Another pause. William tried to make the question casual and failed. "Do they still hide under the table?" Daniel glanced at Maisie, who had one paw outside the coffee table's shadow, and at Hazel, who had chosen open floor. He answered carefully, because hope given too quickly could become another kind of pressure. "Sometimes. Not as much as before. Hazel's spending more time out where she can see the room. Maisie is slower, but she's watching her." William exhaled softly. It might have been relief. It might have been grief putting down one stone. "That's good," he said. "That's real good." Then, after a moment, "Murphy used to sleep under my chair during thunderstorms. Funny thing. I hated storms less when he was there." Daniel did not rush to fill the quiet. William thanked him and ended the call after less than 2 minutes, but the ache of it remained in the room long after the screen went dark. 3 days later, Carol called. Daniel was folding laundry at the kitchen table, an activity he performed with the grim precision of a man diffusing explosives, when her name lit up his phone. "Are they eating well?" she asked almost immediately, then seemed embarrassed by the urgency in her own voice. Carol, at 72, had spent too many years caring in practical ways to know how to stop. Food, blankets, clean towels, medicine measured correctly. These were the small altars where she had offered love all her life. Daniel looked at the 2 bowls near the sink, both empty. "Very well," he said. "Maisie waits longer, but she eats after Hazel starts." Carol gave a small laugh that broke near the end. "That sounds like her." Then she went quiet. "I keep thinking I should have waited more, just sat still maybe. I thought if they knew how much we wanted them, they would feel safe." Daniel leaned against the counter and closed his eyes for a moment. He could have told her the truth in a sharp way, the way truth sometimes likes to arrive dressed as a judge. But Carol had already judged herself enough. "You loved them," he said. "That part was never the problem." On the other end, Carol breathed in, and for a second Daniel imagined her in that white house with green shutters, standing near 2 unused puppy beds, one hand pressed to her chest as if holding herself together. "Then why did it feel like we hurt them?" she whispered. Daniel looked toward Hazel and Maisie. Hazel was chewing gently on the corner of a fleece blanket. Maisie watched her, then copied the motion on the other end. "Because sometimes love moves faster than trust," he said. Carol did not answer, but he heard her crying quietly before she thanked him and hung up. That evening, Daniel took his coffee to the back porch even though the air had turned cold enough to bite. The yard sloped into dark grass and fallen leaves. Above the pines, the first stars appeared, faint and patient. Hazel followed him to the doorway but stopped at the threshold. Daniel sat in the wooden chair and kept his eyes on the yard. After a few minutes, Hazel stepped onto the porch. She did not come to him. She chose a place several feet away, close enough to share the same cold air, far enough to remain herself. Maisie appeared behind her, hesitated, then settled with her chin against Hazel's back. The sight struck Daniel with a tenderness that felt almost painful. Here were 2 lives no bigger than bread loaves, teaching a grown man something he should have learned long ago. Safety could not be dragged into being. It had to be invited, then waited for, then welcomed without triumph when it arrived. He thought of William and Carol, not as failed adopters, but as 2 old hearts still shaped around the dog they had lost. They had tried to love Hazel and Maisie with the map Murphy had left behind. But these puppies came from different weather. They did not need less love. They needed love with doors in it. Love with windows open. Love that could sit nearby without asking to be rewarded for staying. Daniel wrapped both hands around his mug and watched Hazel breathe slowly in the porch light while Maisie slept behind her. The lesson settled over him, quiet as frost. Sometimes love does not move closer. Sometimes love becomes holy by making space, gentle enough for another soul to step forward when it is ready. By late November, the rain had become colder, the mornings paler, and the shelter windows often held a thin fog from all the warm breath and restless hope inside. Daniel Hayes had rewritten Hazel and Maisie's file 3 times before he allowed it to return to the adoption binder. He removed every easy phrase that sounded comforting but meant little. He did not call them perfect family puppies. He did not call them shy, as if shyness were a flaw waiting to be corrected. He wrote the truth as cleanly as he could. Hazel builds trust slowly and chooses contact when given space. Maisie relies on Hazel for emotional safety and needs a patient environment. Both puppies must stay together. No forced handling, no constant pursuit. Slow introductions required. When he closed the file, he felt a strange unease, as if honesty itself were a risk. A less careful adopter might pass them by. A kinder one might finally understand them. 3 days later, Anna Brooks walked into Blue Ridge Haven Animal Shelter with a canvas tote over one shoulder, a travel mug in one hand, and the tired grace of someone who had spent her morning teaching children how to be gentle with scissors, glue, and each other. Anna was 29, average height, with fair skin warmed by a faint scatter of freckles across her nose, soft brown eyes, and chestnut brown hair tied low at the back of her neck with a black ribbon that had clearly lost its battle against the weather. Her coat was navy wool, practical and a little worn at the cuffs, and her boots carried dried mud along the edges. She lived alone in a small house on the south side of Asheville and taught 2nd grade at an elementary school where, according to the quiet rumors Daniel later heard from Megan, she was known for keeping extra granola bars in her desk for children who forgot breakfast and pretending not to notice when they took 2. There was a calmness about Anna, but not the empty kind. Hers had been earned. She looked like a woman who knew noise well and had chosen not to add more to the world unless necessary. Daniel expected the usual questions when she sat across from him in the small adoption room. Most people asked if puppies were house-trained, if they chewed furniture, if they liked children, if they would grow large, if they could be left alone during work hours. Anna opened Hazel and Maisie's file, read it slowly, then looked through the glass panel toward the quiet meet-and-greet room where the 2 puppies rested together on a folded blanket. Hazel lay with her front paws crossed, eyes moving between the door and Daniel. Maisie was curled against her side, one ear folded backward like a misplaced leaf. Anna did not smile in the bright, eager way many visitors did when they first saw puppies. Her face softened instead, as if she recognized something delicate enough to be hurt by enthusiasm. "What makes each of them feel safest?" she asked. Daniel looked at her for a moment before answering. The question had landed differently from all the others. It did not ask what the puppies could offer her. It asked what she might need to offer them. "Space," he said. "Predictability. Hazel needs to decide when to come closer. Maisie needs Hazel nearby while she figures out whether the rest of the world is safe." Anna nodded, not as if she were disappointed, but as if the answer made sense. "Then I shouldn't begin by trying to pet them." Daniel felt the faintest smile pull at his mouth. That would help. Their first meeting lasted 40 minutes, though very little seemed to happen to anyone who did not know how to watch. Anna sat on the floor with her back against the wall, knees bent, a folder of lesson plans open across her lap. She did not call the puppies. She did not pat the floor. She did not make kissy noises, which Daniel silently appreciated with the sincerity of a man spared from a small but real torment. Hazel watched Anna for nearly 12 minutes before lowering her head. Maisie remained tucked close, eyes wide but not panicked. Anna turned a page now and then, marking something with a purple pen. At one point she murmured, "No, Liam, 7 + 5 is not 57, then quietly corrected a worksheet. Daniel stood near the door pretending to check his phone while studying the room. There was no performance in Anna's patience. Some people sat still while secretly waiting to be rewarded for it. Anna simply sat. Her presence did not lean forward. It made room. When she left, Hazel lifted her head and watched her go. Maisie did too, half a second later. Daniel wrote that down. Anna returned 2 days later, then again the following week. Each visit was slightly different, not because she changed her approach, but because the puppies were allowed to change theirs. The second time, Anna brought a book of children's essays to grade. She laughed softly at one paper, then covered her mouth when Hazel looked up. "Sorry," she whispered, not to Daniel, but to the room. The third time, she placed her tote bag on the floor several feet from her knee and ignored it completely. Hazel sniffed it after 20 minutes, stepping forward with the caution of a scout approaching an ancient cave where either treasure or doom might be waiting. Finding only chalk dust, paper, and a wrapped peppermint, Hazel retreated with dignity. Maisie sniffed the air but stayed behind. Anna did not celebrate. She did not even look directly at Hazel. She made a small note in the margin of a worksheet and let the victory pass without trapping it in attention. Daniel felt something in him ease. This, he thought, was what William and Carol had not known how to do. Not because they were unkind, because their love had been starving, and starving love often reaches too quickly for bread. During the fourth visit, Anna spoke more about her house. It had a fenced backyard, a quiet street, and a spare bedroom she used for books, old classroom supplies, and boxes she kept promising herself she would unpack before retirement, which was ambitious considering she was 29. She said there were no other pets, no children in the home, and no rush. "I can give them a room at first," she said. "Not shut away like punishment, just a place that belongs to them." Daniel asked about her work schedule. She answered plainly. School days were consistent. She came home around 4 most afternoons, earlier on Fridays. Her mother lived 20 minutes away but would not visit without calling first. That last detail made Daniel look up. Anna smiled a little. "My mother is wonderful." "She is also a cheerful hurricane. Hazel and Maisie do not need a hurricane." Daniel laughed before he could stop himself. The sound startled Maisie, who raised her head. Hazel glanced at Daniel, decided the strange noise was not fatal, and rested again. Anna lowered her voice. "See? I'm already learning from her." Little by little, Hazel began to choose Anna's side of the room. Not her lap, not her hand. Just her side of the room. On the 5th visit, Hazel lay down near Anna's boot, far enough not to touch, close enough that Anna could feel the warmth of her small body nearby. Anna continued grading spelling papers, though Daniel noticed she stayed on the same page for nearly 10 minutes. Maisie remained behind Hazel, torn between longing and terror. Her little sable body leaned forward, then back, then forward again. Anna did not help her. That was the miracle. She did not rescue Maisie from the discomfort of choosing. She let the choice grow muscles. On the 6th visit, while Anna turned pages in a stack of student assignments, Maisie finally crawled from behind Hazel and settled between Hazel and Anna's canvas tote. Her nose rested near the strap. One paw touched Hazel's back foot. Anna's eyes filled, but she kept her hand still on the paper. Daniel saw her swallow the emotion rather than spend it. There were many kinds of tenderness. This was one of the rarest. Tenderness that did not need to be seen by the one receiving it. The adoption was finalized on a bright, cold Saturday morning when frost still clung to the edges of the shelter parking lot. Anna signed the paperwork carefully, reading every line, asking practical questions about food, quiet routines, vet appointments, and how to handle visitors. Daniel handed her the folder, now thicker with his notes, and felt the old protective reluctance rise in him. He had brought many dogs to this point before, but Hazel and Maisie had changed the meaning of farewell. They had taught him that progress could be almost invisible and still be sacred. Outside, Anna opened the back door of her car and secured the crate without fuss. She did not scoop the puppies up. She did not make the moment grand. Hazel stood beside Daniel's boots for a few seconds, looking at the open crate, then at Anna, then at the shelter door behind them. Finally, she stepped forward and climbed in on her own. Maisie froze. Her eyes found Daniel first, then Hazel. The world held its breath. Anna waited by the car, hands folded, saying nothing. Daniel waited too, though part of him wanted to bend down and make the decision easier. But that would have stolen the very thing Maisie had been learning. After a long, trembling pause, Maisie walked to the crate and climbed in beside Hazel. Anna closed the door gently. Daniel stood in the frost-bright parking lot, silent, feeling both loss and triumph move through him like two rivers meeting. He had not lost the puppies. He had watched them become brave enough to choose a home. A few weeks after the adoption, winter still held Asheville by the sleeve, but the light had begun to linger a little longer on the roofs, as if spring were waiting just beyond the hills. Daniel Hayes was closing the shelter office one evening when his phone buzzed on the desk. He expected a message from Megan about kennel supplies or a reminder about a vet appointment, but Anna Brooks' name appeared instead. Attached was a photograph. In it, Hazel lay beneath a wooden desk in Anna's small home, her black and tan body stretched along the floor, eyes half closed in the soft lamplight. Maisie slept beside the chair leg, sable gray fur ruffled, one small paw touching Hazel as if even in dreams she still needed to know her sister was there. Above them, student papers covered the desk in untidy stacks, and a purple pen lay uncapped beside a mug of cold tea. Anna's message was only one sentence. "I think they like the sound of pages turning." Daniel stared at the picture longer than he meant to. There was no grand rescue in it, no dramatic proof, no shining moment that would make a crowd cheer. It was only two puppies sleeping while a tired young teacher graded homework. Yet to Daniel, it felt like watching a door that had been shut for a long time finally open without a sound. Anna had not demanded trust from them. She had made room for trust to grow, like a patient gardener who knew seeds did not rise faster because someone knelt beside the soil and begged. Over the next few days, the photograph stayed with him. He found himself looking at it during lunch, then again at night when the house felt too quiet without Hazel's careful footsteps and Maisie's soft little sighs. He missed them, though not in the sharp way he had expected. It was more like missing a lesson still echoing after the teacher had left the room. Then, one Thursday afternoon, Anna stopped by the shelter after a routine vet visit. She wore her navy wool coat, her chestnut brown hair tied low and loose, with a few strands escaping around her freckled face. Hazel walked beside her on a loose leash, more confident now but still thoughtful, pausing to study the shelter doorway before entering. Maisie stayed close to Hazel's shoulder, but her tail lifted slightly when she recognized Daniel. That small lift nearly undid him. Anna told him the puppies were eating well, sleeping more openly, and had claimed the space beneath her desk as if it were a royal chamber. Then her expression changed. "I've been thinking about William and Carol," she said. Daniel leaned against the counter, already sensing where the thought was leading. Anna looked down at Hazel, then at Maisie. "They still ask about them, don't they?" Daniel nodded. "Every week." Anna was quiet for a moment. Then maybe they shouldn't have to love them only through phone calls. The visit happened the following Saturday, on a cold afternoon when the sky was pale and the wind moved through the bare trees with the dry whisper of old paper. Daniel came along at Anna's request, not to supervise, but to help the first meeting feel less sudden. William and Carol's white house with green shutters looked almost exactly as Daniel remembered it, though the porch seemed smaller under winter light. The bird feeder hung near the steps, empty except for one stubborn sparrow pecking at nothing, and the porch swing shifted slightly in the wind, creaking like an old man clearing his throat before saying something foolish. Anna parked at the curb and did not open the car doors right away. She sat for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, letting Hazel and Maisie watch the house through the window. "No hurry," she said softly. Daniel heard those words and thought of William saying the same thing weeks earlier, before anyone understood how difficult no hurry could be. William opened the door after the first knock. At 74, he looked leaner than before, his white hair combed neatly, his brown cardigan buttoned wrong at the middle in a way Carol would normally have corrected. His kind brown eyes moved from Daniel to Anna, then past them to the two puppies standing on the walkway. For a second, his face did nothing at all. Then it softened so completely that Daniel had to look away. Carol appeared behind him, small and silver-haired, wearing a pale green sweater and holding a folded dish towel in both hands. When she saw Hazel and Maisie, one hand rose to her mouth. Tears filled her pale blue eyes before any word could reach them. But this time, she did not rush forward. She did not crouch, did not call, did not reach. She stood beside William and let the open doorway become an invitation rather than a demand. Anna introduced herself gently, explaining that Hazel and Maisie were doing well and that she hoped a short visit might be all right. William nodded, but his voice took a moment to obey him. "Of course," he said. "Of course it's all right." Daniel watched the older couple step back from the entrance. It was a small movement, almost nothing, yet it carried the weight of everything they had learned through pain. Hazel entered first. She moved slowly across the threshold, nose low, dark eyes taking in the hallway, the couch, the fireplace, the two small beds still tucked near the hearth. Maisie followed behind her, hesitant but not frozen. The house seemed to hold its breath. Carol's fingers tightened around the dish towel, but she kept still. William's hand twitched once at his side, then relaxed. No one called the puppies. No one filled the silence with nervous sweetness. They let Hazel and Maisie read the room like a book written in scents. Hazel reached Murphy's old blanket near the fireplace and stopped. The blanket had been folded carefully, its worn corners visible, its faded golden fibers holding memories no human could fully translate. Hazel sniffed it once, then again. Maisie came up beside her, nose twitching, and for a moment the two puppies stood where Murphy had once slept for 14 years. Carol began to cry silently. Anna did not speak. Daniel felt the strange tenderness of the moment settle over them all. Love had lived in this house before. It had left a shadow, yes, but also warmth. Hazel turned from the blanket and walked toward William's recliner. William stood beside it, motionless, as if one wrong breath might send her away. She sniffed the chair leg, circled once, and then lay down beneath it. William's mouth opened slightly. He looked at Daniel, stunned and almost frightened by the gentleness of the gift. Maisie lingered near the fireplace a little longer, then crossed the room and settled beside Carol's feet while Carol sat carefully on the edge of the couch. Carol looked down, tears slipping over her cheeks. "Hello, little one," she whispered, so softly it was more breath than voice. Maisie did not move away. The afternoon unfolded slowly, then beautifully. Tea was poured. Anna sat near the window with her cup warming both hands. Daniel took the chair by the bookcase. William picked up the newspaper but did not read a single word. Hazel slept beneath his chair, her breathing steady. Carol pulled a small knitting basket from beside the couch, her hands trembling at first, then finding their old rhythm. She had begun a red scarf weeks ago, she admitted, not knowing whether it was foolish to make something for a puppy she no longer had. It was uneven, one side slightly wider than the other, but Anna smiled as if Carol had shown her a crown. Maisie watched the yarn move, then rested her chin on Carol's slipper. Carol closed her eyes. She did not try to touch her. She simply let the warmth be enough. By spring, the visits had become part of all their lives. Anna brought Hazel and Maisie to the Thompsons' house on Saturdays when she had school workshops, parent meetings, or simply too many errands for two thoughtful puppies to enjoy. William learned to sit with his newspaper and wait for Hazel to choose the space beneath his chair. Carol knitted two small scarves, one red for Hazel and one gray for Maisie. The red one came out a little too short, the gray one a little too long, and both were perfect. The house no longer felt like it was trying to replace Murphy. It felt as if Murphy's long love had made room for something new to pass through. One mild spring afternoon, Daniel stopped by and found them all on the porch. William sat with the newspaper folded across his lap, pretending to read while Hazel dozed beneath his chair. Carol watered a pot of yellow pansies, moving slowly but smiling in a way Daniel had not seen before. Anna sat on the porch swing with a cup of tea cooling beside her, her tired teacher's eyes bright in the soft sun. Maisie rested with her head on Hazel's back, safe enough now to sleep through the porch swing's creak, the birds in the hedge, and the wide, breathing world around her. Daniel stood at the steps and took in the ordinary miracle. No one had received exactly what they thought they wanted. William and Carol had not become the puppy's owners. Anna had not gained 2 easy pets. Daniel had not remained untouched, and Hazel and Maisie had not been forced into anyone's idea of healing. Yet somehow, everyone had been given what they needed: a home, a second chance, a gentler way to love. And on that porch, beneath the tender light of spring, love finally had enough room for every heart to breathe. What stayed with Daniel long after that spring afternoon was not the adoption paper, the phone calls, or even the first time Hazel and Maisie stepped into Anna's car. It was the quiet miracle of a porch where no one was trying to prove anything anymore. William had learned to love without reaching too fast. Carol had learned that a heart can lose one beloved dog and still have room for new tenderness. Anna had learned that patience can become a shelter of its own, and 2 frightened little German shepherds had shown them all that sometimes the most powerful love is not the kind that pulls someone close, but the kind that waits with an open door. Maybe that is one of the gentle ways God works in ordinary life. Not always through thunder, not always through grand signs, but through small changes in the heart, a hand that stops before it grabs, a voice that softens, a chair left empty, a little more room given to someone who is still learning how to trust. In our daily lives, we may all know someone like Hazel or Maisie, someone who does not need to be fixed, rushed, or crowded, but simply understood. And perhaps, if we listen closely, we may also find ourselves in William and Carol, full of love, but still learning how to offer it wisely. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who believes animals can teach us how to love better. Leave a comment with your thoughts, your prayer, or the name of a pet who changed your life. And if you want more stories about kindness, second chances, and the quiet miracles God places in everyday life, please subscribe to the channel. May God bless you, protect your home, comfort every lonely heart, and guide each of us to love with patience, grace, and understanding.